Yeah, you mentioned the American culture war too. I wonder, so much of what you've written about is the power of America in terms of we have this great geography, we have relatively good demographics and things, but we do have a lot of internal disagreement and dissent right now. And I wonder, is that the force that could make America more vulnerable? Or how do you see the internal situation affecting America?
I don't see it as making America more vulnerable, but certainly more distracted and less capable of doing something internationally. Now, if our economy was dependent on international connections, this would be a big problem, but it's not. So the culture war, what's the best way to phrase this? This isn't new, and it's not just this decade. Social media makes it seem bigger than it is, and certainly shortens the time that it takes for people to blow their fuses. But our political system is in a period of reorganization. We have a two-party system with a first past the post network for selecting electors. You take away the fancy word, and what that means is in order to win, you have to get one more vote than the other guy. And in that environment, you're naturally going to have only two parties because you want to throw as wide of a net as possible. And that's why the Democratic Party and the Republican parties traditionally have been such big organizations tapping different factions. So like on the Democratic side, you've got minorities, you've got college professors, you've got urban dwellers, you've got single women. These groups don't have a lot in common on the surface, but the Democrats have built them into an electoral alliance that has the single largest chunk of votership in America. But when you have change in geopolitics and demographics and technology, the factions move around. Some of them jump ship, others come in. And if you look at the last 30 years, we've had the end of the Cold War, we've had the rise of uber globalization, now the collapse of globalization, we've had the baby boomers be the primary consumers, and now they're moving into mass retirement. Of course, this was a time when the factions were going to move, and Trump is representative of that. And so the factions are moving around, and when the factions are moving around, they have to shout to be heard, because if they get left outside of a party, being a swing voter in the United States is not all that much fun, because you don't get to decide any of the platforms. And so nobody wants to be left out, but that doesn't mean everybody wants to be in the coalition they're in or have been in for the last 30 years. The last time the United States went through one of these reshufflings, it was the 1920s and 30s. We had the Great Depression, we had World War II, and it took 12 years for the parties to settle into the forms that we have now. African Americans all used to be Republicans. Big business all used to be Democrats. So we'll get through this. Wow, is it messy?
And in your book too, you talked about different political systems. We have communism, or maybe a communist fascism sort of thing in China. Of course, we have American democracy, capitalism. What do you see for capitalism in a deglobalized, deindustrialized world?
It's going to be there, but that goes for socialism and fascism too. All of our economic models are based on the idea that the pie is going to get a little bit bigger, and without population growth, that is no longer guaranteed. And we're already seeing contractions in significant parts of the world. Europe's probably furthest along in this. I think China is going to be a hard second. And in a world where the pie shrinks, we're in a world of less, we need a new economic theory. Now, in North America, because of demographics in the US and Mexico, we are the place where that's least true. Our demographics are still aging, but we're not going to age into a situation of China or Germany within 30 years. It's more like 50 years, maybe. And that assumes our birth rate never comes back up, which it may. So we get to watch everyone else deal with this. And I know that sounds like all wonky and boring, but keep in mind that the last major conflicts we've had, the Cold War, the World Wars, the German reunification wars, economic theory was one of the big bases for all of that. And to think that everyone in the world is just going to figure out what the next thing is 500 years after this thing on their first try, I'm not that optimistic. How you manage an economy determines who is who in your society, and that is worth fighting for. So I can see us having conflicts internal and multi-state over how economics works now that we are in a world of less.
Yeah. And Peter, my final question is for individual Americans who are getting ready to ride this out. What advice do you have for them to get prepared?
We all need to get used to a faster pace of change, but ultimately, what is going to allow us to get through this is building out that industrial plant. So one of the things that I'm really impressed by the United States' capacity to do is not at the national level, it's at the state and local level, of cities taking their futures into their own hands and going out and finding their own investors or building their own infrastructure or partnering with other cities in other states. We have a great record of doing that in the United States, and the communities that are better at doing that are the ones who are going to be able to write the future.
Excellent. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey everybody, I'm Brad Carr. Thanks for watching this interview with Peter Zeihan. To help me get more great guests like this on the show, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell.